Welcome to the In Truth podcast, where the only agenda is the pursuit of truth. And we are live. That sigh that you've just heard from Margaret, that's because we've been recording for about 15 or so minutes. And we forgot to hit record. Welcome to episode, I think it's number 8 now. I think we've done 8 episodes of In Truth podcast, covering the story of Abraham and going through his story chapter to chapter. Last week we covered Genesis chapter 12. I think covered the journey of Abraham. But before we move on to that, we have a new guest with us, Yusuf. Welcome to In Truth podcast. Blessing to have you here. Tell us a little bit about yourself. And please can I ask that you take care to speak into the mic, position it so that it's close. Either position the mic or yourself so that you're speaking directly into the mic.
Hi everyone, I'm Yusuf. I'm a Coptic Orthodox like the fellow guests on this panel. And it's a pleasure to be here today.
Tell us something about yourself. Something interesting.
I'm 23 years old. Was born in Egypt. Current student at UWA. And a Christian.
Very interesting.
The fact that you were born in Egypt is quite interesting.
It's very
How old were you when you came here?
5 years old.
Do you remember much of it?
Very briefly, like very brief, specific
Like
scenarios.
Snippets, yeah.
Like a room or something like that.
Oh, nice. Where are you from in Egypt?
Somewhere near Zamalek. I forgot where it was. What it was
Oh,
called.
yes, Cairo.
Yeah,
Yes.
in Cairo.
Yeah. I think the majority of Egyptians will actually say that with a pinch of salt. They hate the Zamalek soccer team.
Yeah.
And they're fiercely hated. And then the Zamaleks hate the Ahlawis. Fierce rivalry between them. Thank you for that, Yusuf. You're all, of course, familiar with Margaret, my beloved wife. And by the way, priests within the Orthodox Church are married. So it's, anyone watching this and thinking priests can't get married, it's a little bit different in the Coptic Church. So we say welcome, Margaret.
Thank you.
Blessing to have you. Delving straight in, I think we'll just briefly cover Genesis 12 and what happened. Genesis 12 starts, and this is last week's episode, so please tune into last week's episode, Genesis 12 on Abraham, to cover more extensively everything that we discussed there and everything that is covered in Genesis 12 as far as the journey of Abraham. Starts off with what Abraham gets this calling from God. It's a great calling to leave his house, to leave his family, to leave everything he knows, take his wife, take his nephew with him, Lot, and all their possessions, and journey to a land that the Lord will show them, which ends up being Canaan. Abraham, in obedience, does this. He journeys in obedience to God, and he gets to Canaan, and there he finds a terebinth tree, and he builds an altar to the Lord. And I think something that I want to mention here about the life of Abraham. Of course, he goes on to build an altar to the Lord by the terebinth tree, and in fact, everywhere he goes, though he goes to some wrong places in my view, he builds an altar to the Lord. Mm-hmm. And in fact, the only exception to that is Egypt as far as chapter 12 goes. Anyway, he makes it, actually, before we get into that, I just want to mention this snippet about Abraham. Abraham's given this, what I think, phenomenal title. He is called the friend of God. And, friendship and the word friend is quite an endearing term. It's a term to express a bondness. It's a term to sometimes express fondness, or even a love towards another person. And quite often, well, not quite often, you'd hope every time it's used mutually. Both those friends love and respect each other, love and adore each other, love and have a fondness for each other. And you know, those words, family and friends, are kind of like a cornerstone to the big relationships in our lives, to the important relationships in our life. When you look at it like that, and you think Abraham's given this title, friend of God, someone that he's fond of, and someone that God is fond of, someone that is absolutely a part of his life and a big part of his life, and someone that, you know, God certainly has a love for Abraham, a reserved love for Abraham. And I think something that should be in the back of our minds, and something that we should be considering as we go through this journey of Abraham's, is why is it that he's given that title? Why is it that he's called the friend of God? And I think once we finish all the story of Abraham, as far as, you know, Genesis 12, I think it's to Genesis 22, culminating in the story of Abraham and Isaac. So 10 chapters. I think we should have probably one more episode covering, you know, what the Old Testament future generations think of Abraham and looked at Abraham, but then also what the New Testament says about Abraham, because Abraham and his story become this significant cornerstone of Christianity prophetically, but also a case study for what living faith looks like. Very much looking forward to that episode, and you know, studying Abraham and why he's given the title friend of God, and why he's given titles like the father of faith and a case study for faith. So yeah, back to the story. He makes it to Canaan, Terebinth Tree. Unfortunately, when he gets there, he keeps on journeying elsewhere. He makes it to 2 other places, building altars to the Lord, but then there's a severe famine in the land. And it says, Genesis 12:11, so it came to pass when he was close to entering Egypt, that he said to Sarai, his wife, indeed, I know you are a beautiful woman. Therefore, it will happen when the Egyptians see you, so they will say, this is his wife, and they will kill me, but they will let you live. Therefore, say you are my sister, that it may be well with me for your sake. Abraham here tells Sarai to lie on his behalf for his safety. And Sarai agrees. Sarai is then so beautiful that she's invited or makes her way or somehow is noticed, so that she gets an audience with Pharaoh, and in the palace of Pharaoh. Pharaoh wants to take her on as his wife. But then the Lord plagues Pharaoh's house, and through a revelation of some sort, Pharaoh finds out that these plagues are because he wanted to take Sarai on and his wife. And the reason I know that is Genesis 12:19. It says, why did you say, this is Pharaoh speaking to Abraham, why did you not tell me she was your wife? Why did you say she is my sister? I might have taken her as my wife. Now therefore here is your wife. Take her and go your way. So Pharaoh commanded his men concerning Abram, and they sent him away with his wife and all that he had. I think big themes here is that God hates lying, despite the fact that the law had not been given. You know, the 9th commandment of you shall not lie has not been established yet. Was given in Moses in the book of Exodus many generations after Abram, many generations after Abraham. And by the way, his name here is Abram, has not been changed yet, and his name will be changed. And then the second thing is that God hates polygamy. Although Abraham was fine with their relationship being open, and he gave his, well, not his blessing, but he gave his his willingness for Sarai to lie and for her to have relations with other men, God hated this and he stopped this. And he plagued Pharaoh's house because of this, because this was something detested in the sight of God. So God stops it by sending pharaohs. And although Pharaoh is blameless here in a sense that he did not know and he was operating under a false pretense, he was operating under a lie, nonetheless, this was something that God hated to the extent that he plagued Pharaoh's house with it, and Abraham and all that he has is sent away as a result. I'd love for anyone who has comments on this, any thoughts on this, please share them in the comments below. And on we go to chapter 13, unless anyone has any comments they'd like to share on Genesis 12.
Just think on the last part, because you were talking about how Abraham is referred to as the friend of God. And although Abraham, he lied, as you said, and God hates lying, he protected Abraham and Sarah in a way, and also indirectly protected the incarnation of Christ, because Abraham and Sarah will give birth to Isaac and Jacob. And yeah, he punished Pharaoh.
Yeah. And the thing is, it could have very easily gone the other way. He could have had relationships with her, and then it be revealed to him that Sarai is in fact Abraham's wife and not sister. And Pharaoh holds the weight of life and death in his hand. He could very easily, turn against Abraham, conspire to kill him, imprison him, all sorts of things. But you're right. You're absolutely right. God protects Abraham here, and he protects Sarah, and he protects their marriage. Yeah. Right? I think that's the most significant thing here. The fact that Sarai, remains pure throughout this ordeal, despite the plotting of man and despite the man and woman being both okay with it.
I think the important part as well is that the man is in the role of marriage is to protect. And so God was a role model in this instance to protect what he has joined together. Yeah. So I think in that instance, Abraham was still learning about the faith despite being so faithful. Yeah. I think he was still on a learning journey. He didn't know what God was. So I think God, really showed the essence of what marriage is and the role model of what a male needs to be doing in a marriage.
Of course, that's not to say you men out there should go plague other men that want to
but they need to be protecting their wives.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And thank God protected their marriage. There will be another future incidents where their marriage is not protected and they choose not to protect it through both of through Sarai's will and also through Abram's will in submission to Sarai. And that turns out to be something that breaks their family. But more on that when we get to it. So, any other thoughts on Genesis 12?
Okay, I think just lastly, given the context of the wrath of Pharaoh back in that time, in that context, again, you'd think that someone lying to Pharaoh would be sentenced to death or, you name it, whatever, anything bad. And again, God protected them indirectly through that.
Absolutely. Well, actually, he's sent away with all that Pharaoh gives him. Pharaoh gives him a whole bunch of stuff earlier in the chapter. But he sends him with all that he had. He doesn't even punish him there. And that's a grace afforded to Abraham, despite the fact that he was the one being deceitful here. He was the one plotting all of this here.
Yeah.
So, chapter 13, verse 1. Now Abram went up from Egypt to the south, he and his wife and all he had, and Lot with him. Abram was very rich in cattle, silver, and gold. So he went on his journey from the south as far as Bethel, to the place where his tent was at the beginning, between Bethel and Ai, to the place of the altar he made there at the beginning. Let's stop there. I think that's interesting. I think that's very, very, very interesting. Abraham starts where? He starts in Ur of the Chaldeans, and then where does it say he went? it says he departed for the land of Canaan, and he came to the land of Canaan. Abram passed through the land and went to a place called Shechem, as far as the oak of Moreh. And the Canaanites were taken in the land, were then in the land, and the Lord appeared to Abram, and he said to him again, the promise to your seed, I'll give this land. Abram builds an altar there. That's the first altar he builds, right? By where? In Shechem, as far as the oak of Mamre, which is the terebinth tree. So he moved, and then it says he moved again. He moved to the mountain east of Bethel, and he pitched his tent with Bethel on the west of Ai on the east, and there he built an altar to the Lord. Again, he moves east to Bethel, builds an altar to the Lord, and called on the name of the Lord, and then again he journeys still south. And then, because of the famine, he goes to Egypt. And, although he was in the promised land, not sure I mentioned this when we covered in Genesis chapter 12, but although there was a famine in the land, Abram here tries to rescue himself from famine. And of course, famine is severe. And the Bible takes extra emphasis on that with Genesis chapter 12, Genesis 12:10 says the famine in the land was severe, right? And of course, this is not a famine that we know anything about. This is not a famine that any of us have any sort of business saying we can relate to. This is horrific, catastrophic circumstances. This is the famine, severe famine in the Old Testament is no water, no food. You would prepare for death in severe famine. Your days are numbered. You would prepare, you'd know when your last meal was going to be, and you would prepare to starve to death. You'd prepare to thirst to death. And of course, Egypt was the only place where any food was there. So, I think the first mistake here is that the influences on the world and the hardships of the world caused Abram to leave the promised land to a different land. And for me, that was a mistake by the whole ordeal of what happens in Egypt, although Abram ends up being rich because of it. But I believe that's because of God's grace. And it says it there at the end of this, as per the story of the end of Genesis 12, God was not happy with this. And here it is now, reading in chapter 13. What's it say? It says, came to Bethel, to the place where his tent was at the beginning, between Bethel and Ai, to the place of the altar he made there at the beginning. Abram does this full loop of journeying, his last stop being Egypt, and then he comes back to where he was in the beginning, to where he built an altar to the Lord in the beginning. And I think that's clear that when God has a place for you, when God has a promise for you, to go elsewhere because of worldly hardships, to go elsewhere because maybe, in your view, the grass may be greener on the other side, to go elsewhere because there is, for example, houses there, jobs there, friends there, family there, despite the fact that this may come at the compromise of your spirituality, despite the fact that this may come at the compromise of, for example, education and specifically Christian education of kids, or Christian, let's call it spiritual food. Go somewhere where, work and there's an amazing job there, for example, but there's no church there. There's no priest there. There's no Sunday school there, there's no communion there, there's none of that stuff. I believe that would be a mistake. I believe it would be better to be within a family of God rather than be estranged somewhere, despite having a good job and, in your thoughts, building a good future for your family. And that's an incredibly hard message. That's an incredibly hard message. But I believe our priority, and the thing that we learn from this, is that our priority in life needs to be God. And that comes with hardship. that comes in Abram's case with enduring famine. But he, what I think he should have done is relied on God, who brought him to this land in the beginning, to provide even in the times of famine. Abraham's going to be called to do much harder things than stay in a land where there's famine. He's going to be called one day to put everything that he knows, everything that he lived for, in the altar, in Isaac. So quite clearly here, he's in his infantile journey with God, an infantile journey of faith. Your thoughts on this, Margaret and Yusuf?
Yeah, I totally agree. I think what you're saying is actually emphasized even more, actually a lot more, in verses 5 to 9.
In this
between
chapter, yeah.
Lot and Abram, when they choose the land. But I guess in regards to what you were talking about, was how he wasn't actually sent to go out to Egypt. So that was on his own accord, from what I understand. God never told him to go out. I was looking at some stuff online, some contemplations, and it was talking about how this is how God deals with man, like when man is too preoccupied with his own, let's say, worldly lusts or worldly desires. God is so faithful with us, and he's so righteous with us, that he will still communicate with us through like what we're preoccupied with. So God spoke to Abram through Pharaoh. Other examples would be Balaam, when he became as like ignorant as a donkey, essentially. He spoke to him through a donkey. Saul, or St. Paul, when he was too occupied with like his violence and persecuting Christians, he spoke to him through like a temporary loss of vision. There was another one. The wise men from the east, the 3 wise men, when they were too busy or too preoccupied with like astrology and stars, he spoke to them through the stars.
Yeah.
So, yeah, God's very faithful with us.
Isn't that phenomenal, though? And it's just a testament. Everything that you just spoke about is a testament, first of all, to God's compassion, but to the fact that everything declares the glory of God. If you're into astrology, that's for the glory of God. Everything that you find in there should leave you in awe of God, right? We have a psalm that says, the heavens declare the glory of God until this day. Absolutely agree. Absolutely agree. Margaret?
It's a little bit off topic, but the word Bethel actually means the house of God. So he's going back to the house of God as well. So I think he remains faithful by going back. And he wants to do what is right. I think his intentions are to do good. And so we can see that him returning back also shows his faithfulness, going to the house of God. And worshipping, which is a form of faith. So that just further emphasizes that Abraham.
I'd say that worshipping is as a result of faith. I'd say you worship because of your faith.
Yes,
I think
I'll add one more thing as well.
Yeah.
Regards to verse 1. And I guess, related to what we were saying. Like, so Abraham did the wrong thing. He went to Egypt, and he wasn't asked to. And I guess you can view that as like his fall. And then it says in verse 1, then Abraham went up. And like went up can be, I guess, symbolic of us, like in our lives when we do the wrong thing, we don't listen to God. Like you have 2 options. Either you can stay doing the wrong thing, or stay in despair or with loss of hope, or you can go up like Abraham and
go back and worship at the altar of the Lord.
Yeah.
Quite literally. Right? That's what it says there. He went back to where? Where he built an altar to begin with.
Yeah.
Right?
And
then it says there directly as well, then there Abraham called on the name of the Lord. Word for word. Call on the name of the Lord. I think that's what we Christians have to learn to do. I think when you're in difficult time, you're in hardship, because clearly his time in Egypt was a hard time. Very clearly. Right? But here's the thing that you learn from, and let me read you this commentary. Canaan, not Egypt, was the land of promise. While in Egypt, Abram never lost his focus on God's promise in the gospel of salvation. For he returned to Bethel, the house of God, and called on the name of the Lord. Similarly, those who possess Abraham's faith keep their focus on this same gospel.
Yeah.
Right? When you are down, you know, whether it's any of us, any of our viewers, anyone in the world, when you are down, when you are out, when you are in a rock bottom place, do what Abram did. Go back to the house of the Lord, go back to the altar of the Lord, and call on the name of the Lord. Right? Call on the name of the Lord. That's what it says there. You know, Margaret's probably laughing at me because this is a phrase that she's heard before.
I'm pretty sure anyone that knows Abuna Matthew, we will definitely say to you, call on the name of the Lord when you're going through hardship. So yes, I'm finding that funny because I've heard that multiple times.
Yeah. Well, it's our solution. Here's the thing. David says, even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, which, by the way, that's not a literal place. That's a you spitting, that's you going through a rock bottom in your life. That's you rock bottom spiritually, rock bottom mentally, rock bottom maybe even physically. Kind of like where Job was, and I can't wait till we do the story of Job, by the way. That will be real interesting. Right? When you're at rock bottom, what's our response as Christians? Call on the name of the Lord. Yeah. Right? And call on the name of the Lord with meditation. Right? When you are fighting demons, when you are going through bad times, when you are fighting certain bad influences in your life, certain bad people who are out to get you, certain enemies, and by the way, you know, Christians should have enemies. You should love even your enemies. But when you are going through these hard times, right, whoever it may be, whether it be family, friends, whether it be with yourself, whether it be with work, whether it be whatever tragic circumstance you're going through, sicknesses, deaths, all of these sorts of things. Call on the name of the Lord. Go back to the altar of the Lord. Call on the name of the Lord. The Psalms speak of how only God gives you safety, only God gives you peace, only God gives you that which you seek, that which you need, relief, inner peace, you know.
I was listening to a sermon today. That's very interesting that you brought up that topic because I don't think it's related, but now that you've talked about it, I do think this is. I was listening to a sermon and it was talking about how the world is lying to us so profoundly at the moment, where it's just one lie after another and telling us that everything needs to be in your hands, everything needs to be, you're the one that can direct your life, you're the one that can focus on your life, you're
Autonomy.
your own boss. Yeah, autonomy, like you're your own boss, you're your own independent individual. And that, yes, that's empowering at times, but I think it then negates God. And whenever we negate God and put anything into our own hands, that's when we really fall. That's when we really find our struggles. So I think when we do call on the name of the Lord, and when we do trust in Him and trust Him and have faith in His doings and whatever He needs from us, I think that's when we find His glory and His compassion and His mercy. And we really are fulfilled. Whereas when we're putting things in our own hands, it will collapse, and it's very contradictory, because if everyone's their own boss or if everyone's their own, then my views of what is good for me and someone else's views, it's very much a world of chaos, a world of chaos. So I believe that when we do lean on Him and follow His words, then we're able to have that guidance and we're able to be protected under His wings.
Just on the topic of call on the name of the Lord, so as you guys know, I was at the monastery for 3 weeks prior to this. Abuna Macarius, if you remember him, he gave me a really nice verse from the Bible in Micah 7:8, and it says, "When I fall, I will rise. When I sit in darkness, the Lord will rejoice over me." Sorry, the wrong one. Do not rejoice over me, sorry, I said the complete wrong thing.
That's okay.
Micah 7:8. Do not rejoice over me, my enemy. When I fall, I will rise. When I sit in darkness, the Lord will be a light for me.
Stunning.
Yeah.
So nice.
Yeah. In Psalm 26, the Lord is my light and my salvation, of whom shall I fear? The Lord is the strength of my life. Of what shall I be afraid? You know, and you'll find this absolutely recurring theme studying the Psalms. It's especially prominent in the Psalms, And you know, David, who goes through some dark times, absolutely testifies to this. Any other thoughts? Or shall we move? Are we ready for verse 5?
Yes.
Lot also, who went with the name Lot also, who went with Abram, had flocks and herds and tents, but the land was not able to support them, so they might dwell together, for their possessions were so great they could not dwell together. So strife arose between the herdsmen of Abram's livestock and those of Lot. Now the Canaanites and the Perizzites dwelt in the land at that time. So Abram said to Lot, "Let there be no strife between you and me, and between my herdsmen and your herdsmen, for we are brethren. Is not the whole land before you? Separate from me. If you take the left, then I'll go to the right, or if you go to the right, then I'll go to the left." I think that that strikes amazing, an amazing place in my heart because of, you know, my journey. I've been through a lot, where in my life I felt that I was not meant to be somewhere where I wanted to be, or where God wanted me. I did not want to be there. Location. This is just geography, by the way. But this Genesis 5 to Genesis 10 really resonates with me for that, and I'm absolutely a first-hand experiencer of something very similar to what's happening here. Not in terms of me having great possessions and having to separate from someone in my family because of great possessions, but in terms of you know, a split needing to, or not a split, but a migration needing to happen because of a certain issue. But look what's happening.
Can you give us context, Abuna?
I think a bit later I'll do that. What's happened here is that the possessions of the land, and how many people there were as well, in terms of keepers, in terms of family, in terms of herdsmen, there was just too much. There was too much. And so what needed to happen was that they separate. And Abram here approaches it in such a humble way. In such a way where there is absolutely no pride involved. He is the uncle. He is the elder. He has every right to say, Lot, who has been following Abram, by the way, you can stay here and I'll go, or I'll go and you stay. But he absolutely does not do that. He says to Lot, I want no strife between you and me. We are brothers. Notice that. They're not brothers, by the way. Lot's his nephew. Lot's from a generation after him. Abram's his elder. And yet despite that, he says, we are brethren. You go. If you want to stay here, we'll go. If you want to go, we will stay here. What an incredible step of faith to take. What I was talking about before in my life is, there was a point in my life where I grew up with my family, where I was living, every door was shut for me to stay there. And this was just from an occupational point of view, just in terms of jobs. Every door was shut. And a door out of nowhere opened in a different location, absolutely a different location. One that I've never been to before, one that don't know anyone there, one that I was afraid to take, one that was hard to make the decision, and one where I was recovering from a very, very hard time in my life. And I thank the Lord that I made the decision to go. I thank the Lord that this was clear to me and was made clear to me after what was a very dark time in my life, to take the step and go. Despite the fact that, like I said, I didn't know anyone. This was Perth, by the way. I didn't know anyone in Perth, didn't know the church here, didn't know anyone here. Turns out that, of course, there was a lot of my relatives here, but that was unbeknownst to me, unknown to me. My life has taken this direction to where it is now, absolutely because of that. And this is why this story here of the land not being able to support Lot and Abram really resonates with me. Yeah, thoughts?
Well, what I have done is that there's three main things that I learned from this situation between Abram and Lot. The first one being Abram's immense humility. He showed such a great amount of humility because, first of all, he was much older. He was the uncle of Lot. He was the patriarch chosen by God. And he was told by God that he'll be given this land.
Yeah, God spoke to him, not Lot.
Yeah. But yet he still was happy to give Lot the choice and was happy to part ways. And he also initiated the conversation. And I guess that's unlike what you would normally expect. I guess a king or a patriarch, usually it'd be someone else that would come up to them, would initiate it. But Abram really valued the peace, and to the extent where he swallowed all his ego. He had no ego at all, and he was able to initiate all the conversation.
And the third point?
Well, that was the first one. And after he traveled a very far distance as well, he still gave Lot the choice. The second one was that Abram didn't let things escalate naturally. He took action straight away, and I guess that's representative of we can apply it to our own lives. We shouldn't let things get bitter between our friends or family. If we notice that there's something, we should bring it up and take initiative and communicate well, just like Abram did. And the third one was that Abram was very realistic. Again, that we can apply that to our own lives. Abram knew that given the context, given the land, that they wouldn't be able to suffice on that land. They had to split ways. And it wasn't splitting ways because of their enemies or their hatred. It was splitting ways for peace. And there was nothing wrong with that. Because some people interpret this as there's hatred between them, or it's not right that they're split, but
it was the logistical thing to do. I think the other thing is that going on the humility, he's also very selfless. I think he was able to also just give something that God has granted him to someone else just to keep that peace. So he was, yes, selfless. He was very humble, immense amount of humility, but also a peacemaker. He was the one that really, and these are all qualities that are very biblical and very Christian. So for him to be displaying that very early on in his journey is quite, just goes to show how
remarkable,
how faithful this man was from the beginning. Yeah.
I think one more point I'll add here is that peacemaker, Abram here takes a step towards peacemaking. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of God. Right? Abram was not happy continuing with strife, quote, strife between him and Lot. And then lastly, I think, and this is incredibly important, whatever attachment Abram had, he was willing to forego all of them. Whatever attachments he had to place, to wealth, to anything like that, he was willing to let go of it. And how do I know that? Because he was willing to say to Lot, you take your things and you go this way, I'll go that way. If you go that way, I'll go this way. It says here in the Orthodox Study Bible, He was looking for his eternal inheritance in the world to come. We say in the creed, and we look for the resurrection of the dead and the life of the age to come. His decision here and his approach here tells you that he lived for the promise of God with a detachment to anything worldly.
Yeah.
I think that's phenomenal, and I think that's an absolute lesson for us.
Yeah,
Right? That's a faith manifesting itself into Abram's life in such a way. And how do I say that? Well, Abram here is given a promise. I'll make you great. I'll make your name great. I'll bless those who bless you. I'll curse those who curse you. In your name, all the families of the earth will be blessed. Right? And Abram decides to follow it. Right? He decides to remain faithful to that. And, whereas before in chapter 12, he made a mistake of going to Egypt because of famine, here he doesn't make a mistake.
Yeah.
Here he doesn't follow what his, can we say, instincts would have been, right? And here he walks in faith. And that for me is his faith, that's a manifestation of the great faith that he had in God's promise to him.
Yeah. 2 more points.
Please go ahead.
I think it also goes to show his generosity. Like he was able to forego anything that he would have wanted to see or would have wanted to pick just to be able to keep that peace. But it also illustrates the command of, and he hasn't had it, like we've said before, he hasn't had the tablet, the law from Moses just yet. But it also illustrates the love your neighbour as yourself. Like he really does put Lot before his desires or his wants, really to show his humility and selflessness and all the beautiful words that we said before.
Yeah, he loves his neighbor more than himself, and it follows what it says in Acts 20:35. It says it is more blessed to give than to receive.
Yeah.
I have something written by John Chrysostom here as well, one of his contemplations. It says, when it ended up for the older to lose his first portion, he did not get angry, but was satisfied with his second best portion. When his younger nephew did him wrong, he loved him and gave him help in the time of need, which is in the next chapter when Lot gets taken in chapter 14.
Yeah.
Abram, not seeking his own benefit, but that of others, put himself in harm's way and interceded on behalf of those with whom he had no relationship. His nephew, on the other hand, hearing his uncle saying, "If you take the left, I will go to the right," he accepted the right to choose and sought his own benefit, to lose eventually all his possessions as the whole region burnt up, while all the surrounding regions came to no harm.
Isn't that phenomenal? Right. And although he consciously makes what he thinks is the best decision, when we're just about to go into what happens with Lot and his story, but any thoughts before we do that? Yusuf?
One last thing, just something interesting. So in verse 5, it talks about in that part it talks about gold and silver. And one of the early church fathers, he took silver to be symbolic of the word of God, and he took gold to be symbolic of the spirit or heavenly life. So it was just talking about how Abram, he held on to the spiritual richness, and he didn't let the livestock take hold of him, like the worldly desires, like Lot did.
Wealth, yeah.
Because Lot had a lot of livestock.
Yeah.
Yep.
And that's that detachment that we see from Abram expressed here. And how does that come? By finding God.
Absolutely.
How does that come? by relying on God, by revering God and having Him as the first and foremost wealth of your life as opposed to anything else. And we're going to see a tragic ending to Lot's decision. So let's get into that. Verse 10. Thus Lot lifted his eyes and saw all the plain of the Jordan, that it was well watered everywhere before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, like the garden of God, like the land of Egypt as you go towards Zoar. Then Lot chose all the plain of the Jordan for himself and journeyed east, so they separated from each other. Abram dwelt in the land of Canaan, but Lot dwelt in the cities of the plain and pitched his tent even as far as Sodom. What happens here? Lot lifts up his eyes, sees the plain of the Jordan, ticks all the boxes. It is well watered. And it's so beautiful over there that the Bible even says it looks like the garden of God, like the land of Egypt as you go towards Zoar, right? Clearly, this was a stunning place. Clearly, this was a picturesque place. This is absolutely what Lot was looking for. This is absolutely what Lot was after, right? There's no second thought consideration for anything else. It's the land looks pretty. The land is flowing with milk and honey. Lot goes there. You'll notice here there's no consideration for the people of the land. There's no consideration of God. There's no consideration for anything else that's there. All that the consideration of Lot is here, and it says, as it says, Lot lifted eyes and saw all the plain of the Jordan. It was well watered everywhere, like the garden of God, like the land of Egypt as you go towards Zoar. Then Lot chose the plain of the Jordan for himself and journeyed east, so they separated from each other. So we have this separation that happens. Lot makes his decision. He makes his decision based on, the land being well watered, the land being beautiful. Even the Bible even goes, like I said, as far as to say, like it was the garden of God.
I think if we read, you finished at verse 12, but if you read verse 13, it kind of gives you that little bit more.
Can you please read it for us?
Now the men of Sodom were exceedingly wicked and sinful before God. I think that, and knowing that that is your nearby neighbour, just goes to illustrate furthermore the dangers of picking something for the sake of worldly attachment rather than what is spiritually uplifting. And Lot had first pick, which means he didn't have to go near Sodom and Gomorrah, knowing that these people are wicked, knowing that they're full of sin. That's a neighbouring city. But because he saw Jordan,
plain of the Jordan, yes.
fruitful, and fertile with all the water, then he chose that, but he didn't have
any consideration for who's there.
Spiritual aspect, yeah.
What do we learn from this in the modern day? Well, let me ask you this. When you come to look for a house, are you only looking for a suburb that increases its value the fastest over time? Are you looking for a property? Of course, I'm talking for where to live. Are you looking for a property that's not necessarily close to church, not necessarily close to family, but nonetheless is a good suburb because it's a fast-growing suburb, or because all the shops are nearby, or because the beach is nearby, or because the shopping centers are nearby? Where do you put God as a consideration when you go to buy a house, when you are in the real estate market? Where does God rank as a priority? Where does the house of God as the church rank on your priority where does studying the people around, looking at the people around, what the people around are like, what the suburb is perhaps known for, the what's the community around that suburb like, you know, you know, I haven't come across someone who, if at all, considers it a priority even to speak of. What I've come across is, and you know, the considerations that I see people consider are all financial. You know, all reputational, all financial, all comfort. You know, and I think it's very clear here what we learn from the story is that it ought not be. I'm not saying those things are absolutely not to be a consideration, but I am saying that God ought to be the first consideration. Yusuf.
Yeah, I was just going to touch on that. Like, what school do we send our kids to, or what job do you choose? Is it about the salary or the location, or even the nature of the job? If a job is 60, 70 hours a week, do you have the self-discipline to continue going to church every Sunday, going to Tasbih, doing your services and all that stuff? I'm sure many people do, but I know I myself, I wouldn't be able to, and I'm sure most people wouldn't be able to. So, as you said, like, is God number one, and then we fill the gaps with the worldly stuff, or are we choosing the worldly stuff, like the financial returns, the convenience, the career growth, and then we're filling God in the gaps?
Yeah. And you know, those things that you mentioned, tasbih, being in the service, all of that sort of stuff. Of course, that's important. But even more important than that is quiet time with God, right? Even more than that, I mean, if you're just working and going to church but spending no quiet time with God, no quiet time with the Bible, no quiet time in meditation, in you know, repentance, in reflection, in prayer, in all of those things, I think there's a great loss here. And I think prioritizing money, prioritizing your future is a faithless way to go about life. I think we should do God first in faith, then everything else in work, right? Everything else, because God has blessed us. We work because we put to use God's gift that He has given us. But first and foremost, we live in faith. And you know, there's great examples of saints and godly people in the past, whether biblical or non-biblical, from all time frames in history, that have put God first at great expense to their own, at great expense to their wealth. So many saints, especially within the Coptic Church, that have absolutely inherited huge wealth, massive wealth, and given it away in pursuit of God. Not that I'm calling for that. I'm not calling for all of us to go sell everything that you have and follow me. But actually, I am saying that because the Bible says that. But what is that to say? That is to say that God has to be the first priority, above all things and above your judgment, above work hours. If work hours comes at the compromise of your spirituality, then live a faithful life where you compromise on that. And if work won't allow you to do that, then it should be a huge consideration. Or actually, what you should be doing is look for another job, even if it's a demotion, even if it's a pay cut, right? I think that's something that I learned from this.
I think we've talked about physical possessions and worldly possessions and the physical location and how that affects spiritually. But I think if we think about things that are like sometimes untangible, so the worldly temptations that, yes, obviously sometimes they're tangible, but I think if we're that spiritual warfare that we're talking about as well. So if you're around friends that may potentially steer you away, or you have this particular addiction, or you have this particular this one particular sin that's in your heart and that you haven't given to God completely, I think that really affects your spiritual life. And I think that is when we can see something like Lot doing, like when we're only holding on to most of the spiritual stuff, but we're then wanting to hold on to something that's maybe a little bit worldly or spiritual attachment, unspiritual attachment. So it's like we're not giving our full heart to God like Abraham did, but we're on the outskirts. It looks like we're wanting the best for our family, but then if you look in that small little corner, that's a wicked, sinful city. And so I think we need to be plucking out all those little things that we hold dear in our heart, so that we can be redirected and be faithful in doing God's work.
Yeah.
Just have three things. The first one is, flip it the other way around. The Bible is making it very clear that the things that are probably going to advance you in life, in like a material sense, they will be detrimental to your faith and to your spiritual life. And you can see that in society, like all the big companies that have all the high-paying salaries, most likely, or more likely than not, they will be the ones that are conforming to like societal values and all that stuff. Not to get into any specifics, but you guys know what I mean. Secondly, there's a concept of like false humility that the Bible speaks of, and I think it's in Colossians specifically, Colossians 3. And we see Abraham here. He didn't demonstrate that. He gave Lot the choice. Lot chose, and then Lot chose the better, like in a material fashion, he chose the better one. And Abraham didn't just go and be like, oh, actually, no, I want that one. You should go to the other one. He was happy with his decision. He let him choose, and that was it. So it was true humility. It wasn't false humility.
Oh.
And the third one is, there's another contemplation here that compares where Abraham and Lot lifted their eyes to. So Abraham lifted his eyes up to Eden, the place where man was deprived of like eternal life because of the devil. And that made him like search deep and dig deep into his heart to show compassion for his nephew Lot. Whereas Lot, he looked up to the fertile land. What does it say specifically? He lifted up his eyes to see all the plains of Jordan that was well watered everywhere. And yeah, in comparison to Abraham, he said, we are brothers. But Lot said, I'm going to choose this side and I'm going to go there. So yeah, the very clear distinction between the action and the intentions between both of them.
Yeah. And Abraham's words, they weren't fake here, like Yusuf was just saying, right? They were real. He made his decision. Abraham did not recant. He said exactly what he said. He did exactly as he said.
Yeah. And he was quite integrate in staying true to his word. Like I think sometimes when someone actually offers something and then someone chooses the better, you can go, you sure? But that one looks really good, or try and redirect him, but he didn't. He took it straight away, was very faithful. And I think the next section of this chapter really illustrates that as well.
Yeah. Two more things I just want to highlight. First of all, I think Yusuf tapped on a very important thing here, which is wealth and love of wealth and materialism comes at the expense of spirituality, right? That's a Christian philosophy and concept foundational. It's actually it's the reason why we fast. Matthew 4, Jesus is taken up into the desert, into the wilderness, led by the Spirit. He's led by the Spirit into the wilderness, and after fasting 40 days and 40 nights, the devil comes to him and tells him what? You're hungry. Step outside of the will of the Spirit. Step outside of the guidance of the Spirit, and what? Turn this rock into bread so that you may be filled. Right?
Jesus.
What was wrong with that is not eating. Yeah, Jesus. What was wrong with that is not eating. Eating is not sinful, right? when we're hungry, God has blessed us with food. God has given us food. This is something that we consider a blessing in our life. Some people that don't have food, food is not the problem. God gave us food. Of course, indulging in food, overindulging in food, this is sinful, right? And of course, the other way as well, on the other side of the spectrum, hating food, having a relationship with food where, you hate food, can't stand food, decide that food is evil and not eat of it to the extent where you become malnutritioned. This is also wrong. Right? Because on the one hand, food is something that God has blessed us with, just like everything else, just like jobs. But we walk through this balanced way of life, right? And, to hate food, to hate the blessing that God has given you, this is bad. And to overindulge in food and to make it the priority in your life and work your life around food, this is also wrong. And so, when we replace priorities, when we take the place that God belongs and replace it with something else, where God belongs, of course, is absolutely the first priority. In fact, he should stand apart from all other priorities. He belongs in a category of his own. But when anything else creeps into that place where only God belongs in your heart, that absolutely comes at the expense of your priority. This is why God says, if your hand causes you to sin, cut it off. If your eye causes you sin, pluck it out. Why? And he's not, by the way, this is Hebraism to say, take extreme measures against sin, as opposed to actually going out there and cutting your hand or plucking your eye. This is not what God calls for. But the principle here, the Christian foundation here is take extreme action against sin. As if it's a poison. Well, actually not as if, it is a poison in your life. Replacing God with something else is sinful. Replacing God with something else comes at the expense of your spirituality. Take extreme measures on it. The other thing that I wanted to mention here is the men of Sodom were exceedingly wicked and sinful before God. This is an unspeakable kind of wickedness that we're going to see in chapter 14, right? Next week's or next episode's chapter, right? These people are on an unspeakable level of wickedness, a wickedness that I dare say we have not known in a recent or modern history. This is an unspeakable kind of wickedness that I probably don't want to delve into for now. But suffice it to say that this place was so sinful, so wicked in the sight of the Lord that it's not livable there. It's absolutely not livable there. It is the kind of life that these people are living, from old to young, from male to female, is absolutely a degenerate way to live, a delinquent lifestyle. And it's not livable. It's not livable there. This place, because of the presence of the devil within these people, because of the wickedness of these people, exceedingly wicked behavior of these people, it becomes not livable. Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, I just had one more small little thought. I think it's also the deception of beauty. That Lot chose the more fertile land, because it looked
outside beauty.
Yeah, it looked better, perceived to be better. I think we have to be watchful of that external beauty and what looks good, but rather try and look at both the external and internal, more so internal.
Christ here likens the cup. He says the outside of the cup is clean, the inside is dirty.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, reading the Bible, you'll come to that conclusion very quickly, right? This is an overwhelming message in the Bible, overwhelming message of the gospel. Okay, verse 14. Then God said to Abram, after Lot separated from him, lift your eyes now and look from the place where you are, northward, southward, eastward, and westward. For all the land you see I give to you and your seed forever. And I will make your seed as the dust of the earth. And if a man could number the dust of the earth, then your seed also could be numbered. Arise, walk in the land through its length and its breadth, for I will give it to you. And Abram moved his tent and went and dwelt by the oak of Mamre in Hebron and built an altar there to the Lord. So much things I want to say here. The first thing I want to say is you'll notice that the Lord comes to Abram when, and the Bible makes an emphasis here. What it says, then God said to Abram after Lot separated from him. After this separation, the Lord comes to Abram. The Lord comes to Abram and says what? To a land that he had no choice in picking. He is only there by the dictation of Lot moving. He had no part to play here in terms of where he is dwelling right now. Lot has gone. He had no place. He had no hand to play. It was all Lot's decision where he is dwelling and the land that he is calling home now. And yet the Lord says what? Lift your eyes now and look from the place where you are, northward, southward, eastward, and westward, for all the land you see I give to you and your seed forever. Where is that, by the way? That's, well, Bethlehem. That's Jerusalem, the holy land of God, right? It's amazing that God re-emphasizes the covenant, and what makes it even, I think we have to wrap up quickly because we're running out of almost running out of space. Okay. Makes it even emphasizes the covenant that he gave him at the beginning of chapter 12, right? It was first about descendants. It was first about a land. Here it's expanded. Everything that you see, as far as you can see, eastward, westward, southward, northward, this is the land that I will give you. And not just that, I will make your seed exceedingly abundant. So abundant that I will make your seed that they will become like the dust of the earth. And if a man could number the dust of the earth, then your seed could also be numbered. Arise, walk the land through its length and its breadth. I will give it to you. Then Abram moved his tent and went and dwelt by the oak of Mamre in Hebron and built an altar to the Lord there. Astonishing. We see a fulfillment on this in Exodus chapter 1. I'll just go to it very quickly. While I'm getting there, anyone who'd like to make a comment, please do.
I have three things, but should I wait until you?
You always have three things. I love it. It's like Trinity.
Trinity?
Yeah, go ahead.
Number one, it talks about like eastward, westward, all that stuff. And as you said, God waited until Lot had left. So it's almost symbolic of like once the negative thing in your life or the thing hindering you back has left, God, you're free, you're released, you can go in any direction. And you see that in Ephesians 3:17-19. It says that Christ may dwell in your hearts through faith, that you being rooted and grounded in love may be able to comprehend with all the saints what is the width and length, depth and height. So width, length, depth and height, to know the love of Christ which passes knowledge, that you may be filled with all the fullness of God. The second thing, very quickly, was at this point Abraham's life, he hadn't even had a son yet. So it really shows the amount of faith that he had, where he wanted a son, he hadn't had it yet, and he trusted in God fully. And the covenant that God made with him was a covenant that would be realized after his passing. So he wouldn't even live to see all his descendants and all the land and all that stuff. So, yeah, he was truly a man of strong faith, that he trusted in everything, even though he wasn't alive. And yeah, I'll leave it at that.
Margaret?
That's all right. Read your
Well,
verse.
we see a fulfillment of, God's promise to Abraham in Exodus chapter 1, verse 7. Then the children of Israel increased and multiplied, became numerous, and grew exceedingly mighty, and the land was filled with them. By the way, these are what? These are from 75 people who migrated from the land of Canaan to Egypt because of the famine. And it becomes so that the earth is filled with them as an enslaved nation. To the extent that Pharaoh, in Exodus chapter 1, tries to get the midwives to kill all male Hebrews at birth. He instructs the 2 midwives to kill all male children at birth. This isn't a fake covenant. As sons of God, I consider myself, by the way, a son of Abraham, and I am a son of Abraham, right? I'm a son of Jesus. I'm a child of God. And I am a son of Abraham in that way. I'm a son of Abraham because I look at him and I consider him my father of faith. I consider him my first patriarch. This is not a false covenant. Christians are all over the earth right now. And all of them, every true Christian out there, would call Abraham their father, would call Abraham their first patriarch, would call Abraham the friend of God, would use Abraham as a case study of what living faith looks like. I think that's astonishing, right? I really do. And I think the re-emphasis of this covenant by God and him coming to Abraham and re-emphasizing this, that's a big deal. That's a big deal.
I think it further illustrates God's providence in this fact that he gave him a promise in chapter 12, and Abram knew that and recognized that and was able to then trust that wholeheartedly, and it was fulfilled. And the second that, as you said, Yusuf, as soon as the that negative influence was out of sight, God was like, "You did well. You held your faith. You held your trust in me," and he almost secured God's promise to Abraham or Abram.
Over and above being called the friend of God, I forgot to add this part about the faith, but he's also referred to as a hero of faith, in Hebrews, by St. Paul. And I won't say the verse just for the sake of time, but yeah, St. Paul refers to him as a hero of faith.
Yes.
The other thing was, I'll let you go.
Well, the other point that I wanted to make here is that Abraham does what? End of verse 13. Built an altar there to the Lord. Wherever he went, he had an altar to the Lord. That's astonishing.
Yeah. I love the comparison where Lot pitched a tent and then Abram built an altar.
Right. Right. Where was that from Lot? I mean, Lot, you were there with Abraham when he journeyed from Ur. You were there with Abraham when he journeyed to Egypt. You were there every step of the way, and you saw that Abraham built altars to the Lord wherever he went. Right? Lot doesn't do that. But Abraham here stays faithful. Everywhere he went, he knew, not he knew, but he built an altar to the Lord. This is a man who walked in friendship with God. Astonishing chapter. I think we're going to see a lot of drama coming up next in chapter 14. Any final thoughts on chapter 13?
Just final, like the distinction between Lot, he goes to Sodom and Gomorrah, which is obviously destroyed. Abram, he goes to the terebinth of Mamre.
Terebinth tree of Mamre, yeah.
And that's where in Genesis 18, the angel of the God comes and tells him about Isaac coming. So, yeah, very vivid distinction there. Lastly, Hebron means fellowship. So he went to the terebinth tree of Mamre in Hebron, and Hebron means fellowship. So finally, the final point is just again, the distinction between Lot going to Sodom and Gomorrah, Abraham, he went to have fellowship with God. And other people, Origen, the scholar, he says it also means union. So he went to have union with God. And
What a way to end. What a story thus far. Tremendous faith in today's story, in today's chapter. I hope we can all see this and take the way and the actions that Abraham took and learn from it, as opposed to what had happened to him and what he did at the end of chapter 12. Right? We see here really grow in God in this chapter. He really grows in God. The steps he makes, the peacemaking that he goes through, the proposal of the separation of the land with Lot, the fact that the humility that he expresses to Lot, the fact that he doesn't renege on that and holds true to his words, the fact that God comes to him after, re-emphasizes the Abrahamic covenant with him, and that's something that you're going to see me referred to. And this is part of the Abrahamic covenant. I'll give you this land. I'll give to your seed forever. Your seed will be as the dust of the earth. If any man could number the dust of the earth, so will your descendants be. And that's true. If we were to number Abraham's descendants, from Abraham to Isaac to Jacob to the 12 tribes of Israel to now, his descendants would vastly outweigh, well, not vastly outweigh, but would be like the dust of the earth. Can't wait to do chapter 14. Please comment. Please give a thought. Please share any thoughts that you have. And we look forward to any last thoughts before we wrap up.
and subscribe.
Well, you can ask for that.
I have one thought, but I don't want to be
Yes.
the last one to speak.
No, go ahead.
But I think if we, in our everyday life, if we just hold steadfast and trust in God, even through the hard circumstances, and be integrate. So we need to know who God is to stay integrate to what God calls for us to do. And if we do that, then we're able to then walk in his way, and his promise for us is shown. His promise for us is revealed all the time. Like
Yeah.
God has showed up so much for Abram.
Yeah. And for me here, it's a big deal that the covenant is re-emphasized. The covenant is not forgotten. What was said to Abram, at the beginning of chapter 12 is further re-emphasized here, right? God does not recant on his covenant. God does not lie with his covenants. He does not come up short with his covenants. God bless you and keep you all. Any last thoughts? And we'll hope to see you next episode for chapter 13.
14.